So we're checking out the 2A library. This is an experiment with the decks here to talk about our 2A history and hopefully start some conversation, because I'm by no means an expert, just a little bit of internet research. So as I was researching our 2A library, books that I figured would be relevant in the discussion on our Second Amendment and its defense, we start out with what's the first book, or what's the first thing out there. And one of the significant periodicals we have today would be the American Rifleman, which is the periodical of the National Rifle Association, and that's basically was established in 1923, but it is or was another magazine before that called called Arms and the Man. So if we go before if we take a look at Arms and the Man, that magazine was monthly, and it lasted between 1906 and 1923. The people that had this one, that eventually gave it to the NRA, acquired it from a guy who was appreciated the NRA, and this Arms and the Man was sold to the NRA in 1916, so about halfway through its run. It was sold to the NRA for $1. And while the NRA took it over, they increased its circulation up to 2,400, and then in 1923 they decided to change it to the American Rifleman. So it was what we see now. The American Rifleman comes from this periodical called Arms and the Man, which lasted for almost 20 years, and it comes from a guy, or it came from, in 1906, it came from this magazine, a weekly magazine called Shooting and Fishing. So Shooting and Fishing was a guy who had started a magazine called The Rifle in 1885, and this may be, at least it's the first card in our deck, this may be the first intentional periodical for firearms. And this was started by a guy in 1885. It lasted for 3 years on a weekly basis, and it talked about shooting and fishing, kind of stuff we talk about in gear reviews today. So it's literally the beginning of firearms chat, was doing gear reviews for fishing and hunting. And then the publisher in 1888, he renamed it Shooting and Fishing, and there must be someone who knows why. But when he renamed it a couple years later, he attended an NRA match, his first NRA match, and I guess he got hooked, and he really enjoyed the NRA. And in 1903, when he died, the magazine passed on, and that person who bought the magazine in 1906 decided to switch it from weekly to monthly, and they called it Arms and the Man. And that person, I believe, was the NRA already. He was like the president of the NRA or something. So this guy started a magazine when he in 1885, ran it for 3 years, renamed it Shooting and Fishing. At some point, attended an NRA match and became affiliated with the NRA. He then died, and his publication was sold to the guy who was running the NRA. Couple years after acquiring this publication, the guy that was running the NRA changed the name to Arms of the Man, and then sold it to the NRA for $1. Then that was in 1916, that they sold it to the NRA for $1, and then a few years later, 1923, it's renamed the American Rifleman. And it's been a monthly magazine since 1923 for the members of the NRA. It's never had a subscription or a cover price. It's only ever been available to members of the NRA. So you can see where it stands in history, at least as far as the history that I was able to discover with the time I had to do it. We have The Rifle, that original magazine, a weekly magazine, coming out in 1885. It wasn't until 1898, so 10 years after it switched names, Julie Galoob, I had no idea she was that old. I guess I got a mistake on there. But it wasn't until 1898 that Outdoor Life was first published, and I believe that was monthly, not published by Julie Galoob. But after 1898, you got Field and Stream in 1895, and we still have Outdoor Life and Field and Stream today. But did you know that the National Rifleman, or excuse me, the American Rifleman, it had its roots before both of those, and then even through its three variations, you get the American Rifleman showing up basically not too far after Field and Stream, a couple of 30 years after Field and Stream, and then I don't know if I have too many other magazines in here. A bunch of these are just books and stuff. I guess you get your Gun Digest starting up a couple of 20-something years later in 44, and Shotgun News has been coming out. It says thrice monthly. I don't know if it's been that often since 1946, though. We have Guns Magazine, been monthly since 1955. You got Guns and Ammo, monthly since 1958. Some of these are annuals. Now, this wasn't the first Newsweek. That was just a Newsweek that pissed off the 1968 Gun Control Act. I've got American Hunter, starting in 1973. And Handgunner, started in 1976. Again, this isn't the first Newsweek. And I don't think there's any really new magazines starting up after that. But that gives you a little perspective, hopefully, on the American Rifleman and some of the early, or where the origins of our firearms magazines, our periodicals, come from. Let me know if that was helpful. That's sort of the concept of this deck, and I can dig into things like training and instructional manuals and 2A. That's what it was really all started with. It actually started with a couple of books. This whole thing started off with Masad Ayoub's book, which I knew I needed to include. His first book from the 70s or something. Oh, after this, what is it? Extreme. The Gravest Extreme. So I knew I wanted that book, and there was a couple of other books by John Lott, for example. This Gun Owner's Travel Guide keeps popping up, but I knew some books were important, and then when you start to get some of the firsts and some of the beginnings of the magazines, when they start to put things in perspective, it starts to create a massive deck. I guess I could span it this way to give you more idea how big it is. But let us know in the comments what you think of this look at the magazine, American Rifleman, and what you might be interested in for future looks into the library. Thanks for watching.
The guys and gals at gunwebsite.com encourage you to take a CCW course every year, practice at least once a month, and carry every day. Thanks for watching gunwebsites.com.